talking today about the Egypt-Euro relationship, Euro-Mediterranean relationship, from the constitutional perspectives, cultural and political ones. The roadmap of my presentation here is going to go that way. A history of Egypt's constitution. B, the Egypt's revolution on January 25th. Third, the pillars that constitute the EU-Egypt relation, which is probably the same pillars that governs the European Mediterranean relationship with North African countries. And finally, the value of what's happening in the spring of revolution in the Arab countries in relation to Europe. From a historical point of view, Egypt has been the source of enlightenment in the past history and in the recent history. And the reason I'm showing this particular slide is to focus on the fact that three ladies has ruled Egypt thousands of years ago: Nefertari, Hatshepsut, Cleopatra. And this young man, Akhenaton, was a young person. So young people and women were in power in Egypt long time ago. And it's important to focus on that fact. Recently, Egypt has gone through many revolutions, starting from this man in 1882 till the final revolution that we've seen in January 25th. These are pictures of 1952 revolution, and finally the revolution that was recently invited and ignited the people of the Arab world. The spark of revolution was related to dignity, freedom, and social justice. It was not because of unemployment or economic situation. It was all about freedom and dignity. And this revolution, while still in infancy, global, it affected the world globally through some breakthroughs. It established the presence of Egyptian youth in the center of economic domains, and they became effectively players while they were ignored for a long time. They were inspiring, they were self-sacrificing, they were enterprising, not only to Egyptians, but to the whole world. The consummation of Egypt's revolution was the moment when the ex-president Mubarak was forced to get out of the office. And it was the starting point of new Egypt transition, and the success or failure of the transition of that process will have huge impact on the future of the country. Why is Egypt important to Europe? Why Egypt matters so much in the southern Mediterranean or in North Africa? The size of the country's population is about 85 million people. It constitutes 25% of all the Arab countries. And if we count only the southern Mediterranean or North Africa, then we're talking about more than 50% of the population is in Egypt. So it is a huge market. If economically stable, Egypt can be a very large market to Europe. And at the same time, because of the population, there is a future immigration and migration that can cross borders, whatever the laws are. And add to this that historically and at the present, around 8 million Egyptians are working outside Egypt in other Arab countries, which constitute a huge bulk of population that can affect any relationship with Europe, which is the major trade partner of Egypt. At the same time, historically and culturally, Egypt was the source of enlightenment in the recent history as well as in the past history, together with the geopolitical position connecting east with west, north and south, with the ingenious presence of Suez Canal that affects the whole trade, the trade of the whole world. Egypt is buzzing now with political activities. Cairo is a place where political actions is being taking place, and new parties are formed, and new political groups are acting in conjunction with each other and against each other in the transitional area that we are facing now. It's important to describe what was the situation in the country before. I call it a hybrid status, a hybrid situation, where we used to have elections and constitutions and law, but actually no democracy by the meaning understood absolutely by democracy. So we have elections but no democracy. Unfortunately, the revolution has taken also a hybrid direction, meaning that it is not totally authoritarian and it's not totally democratic. Fundamentally, the impulse of the revolution was democratic. The protests and the early referendum with the people going to vote was democratic, but it also had features of undemocratic situation. A role of a military with their brutal action against protests, the presence of religious political groups, Muslim brothers, who wants to get over and rule everything, get the executive, legislative, and everything at the same time. The young people in the revolution, with the inspiration of revolution, who do not want to listen to others, and with no reconciliations, acute in their opinion, and the undermining of the rule of law for the populist means, because if we go into political trials without using the rule of law, then we're getting out of the real democratic change. So there are characters of the revolution in a hybrid situation. The key question is whether revolution, democratic aspiration that we started with, can persist the current stresses on it, and persist and sustain its inspirational democratic approach in the presence of A, military, B, a political Islam. The answer will depend on the players, again, military, Muslim brothers, and political party, but most important on the economic situation, because if the economy goes down, then people would not be able to sustain the situation of the revolution. And still there are major majority within the people who are not participating in the action. So three factors has to be taken together and affect the outcome. Now we come to the main point of this presentation, which is the EU-Egypt's relation, and at the same time it can present a similar situation to the EU with all other North African countries. The relationship between the EU and Egypt has been governed by a treaty agreement signed in 2004. And the enlargement of the European neighborhood policy has affected its relationship with the North Africans, southern Mediterranean, which are the partners of Europe, whether we like it or not. Over the last decades, Europe, through the Commission of European Union and other country assistance, has spent in Egypt around 1 billion euro. 1 billion euro, in my opinion, of assistance is a huge amount of money. And I believe, and from my analysis, it had a huge influence economically and in the social sectors, particularly with good impact on women rights, children's rights, and development of NGOs. But at the same time, it had a minimal effect politically on the political reform. What is the governing situation here between EU and Egypt? Three pillars affect that relationship. A, the trade and economic integration. B, the social and cultural cooperation. C, the political dialogue and reform. So Europe is acting with its southern Mediterranean, North African Egypt, which constitute 50% of the population of the North African countries, through these three pillars. The trade and economic situation was very valuable, but as I show here, the Egypt GDP has been growing between 7% to 5.5%, dropped to 3.8%, and then dropped to -4% at the first year after revolution, which is understood. There is unrest, security is not good. People were waiting to see what happens. But what I would like to show that pattern of growth could continue forward. The idea is that the growth of GDP and the economic development, when we talk on a macroeconomic level, sounds good. But when we trickle down to the microeconomic structure, people are still suffering. And people, life was not changing. And so the complaint is still there. We see in the newspaper and in economic analysis that there is a growth of 7%, but nothing has happened in the ground. The reason is, which is important to know, that even if Egypt grow by 7% or 8% with a population growth of 3%, then the value on individual family will not ever be more than 5% per year. And that value of growth will go more to those who can afford, to those who are better educated, and those who can grasp the opportunities of growth. So you end up with people growing more than 15% and others growing within 1 or 2%. This cannot make the change. And the change can only come when the services to the people, socially, education, health, transportation, housing, and food becomes more available, better quality, and it should be reached easily without corruption. And these are the role of the government, and this is the essence of the cooperation needed from EU to a developing country like Egypt. The social and cultural cooperation involves also the movement of workers, the migration issue, the intercultural dialogue, the social integration, and as I said, education and health. And I believe the effect of EU cooperation to Egypt was positive in that sense, but not enough. Failure to help Egypt politically and economically is likely to create migratory effects. If people are not happy, usually, historically, they move somewhere else, and they move where the jobs are, whether this is legal or illegal, and we don't want that. We want the assistance between Europeans and Egypt to build up the technical skills and the education standards of the Egyptians to be able to work in the European context, in a legal structure, in a regulatory migration format where they can come and go and come back to their country with more experience. That is better for both situations if we're looking sanely and with wisdom to the future. The problem usually was in the political help. That included democracy and rule of law, human rights and fundamental freedoms, rights of women and children, freedom of association, fight against discrimination, social rights, combating terrorism, non-proliferation of weapons. These are all sectors that was put under the political cooperation between Europe and Egypt. And there was always that complaint of double standard. We have to be clear about the fact that between the values of democracy and the political desire of Europe to have impact on countries like Egypt, and on the other hand, the presence of authoritarian rule that would not allow major political reform to happen. The trade-off here was that there was some keeping away part of the value of democracy and gain access to the society. On the other hand, the political systems in Egypt would gain the assistance and at the same time do not give away political reform. Egypt's revolution 2011 still, after that revolution, the matter is still democracy versus stability to Europe. And it seems that the role and the ability of foreign actors and donors such as the EU, which is a larger one, is to support this process. So far, we don't see a valid change of the system or the tools. Usually the tools are budget support or twinning of institutions or projects that would continue going on. But lots of the money and support usually go into the sides, marginalized in the process, in the consultancy, in the travel arrangement, in the bureaucracy, and finally what is left to be spent upon the target achieved is little. Europe is looking for more friendly environments. That has to be decided because it's still vague whether the new systems is going to be fully democratic or it will be following the same old structure with different name. My understanding is the Europeans are going for a new way of handling the relationship, which is called deep democracy. It's a concept mainly consists including the civil society and more down-up assistance directly going to the stakeholders at the grassroots. The elements are specified at the basis of this new partnership in democratic transformation, stronger partnership with the people, and sustainable and inclusive growth of economic development. To me, these are words being repeated and needs to be tested by the implementation process. The substantial content of the European neighborhood programs and tools are the same. So the revision of the EMP towards the Mediterranean countries might rearrange the emphasis of the current implementation. And including the civil society, encouraging bottom-up initiatives cannot be done without a counterpart government that can understand the value of democracy and the value of participation. Are we going to just redo what we did before? And I think there is a lot to be done between Europe and the neighbors in the southern Mediterranean to ensure that the tools used for the partnership is more effective than before. And let me emphasize the fact that the shrinking economic activity which is already a major problem, could lead to a more violent situation between young and old, between women and men, between Muslims and Christians, between poor and rich. The economic situation is very important. So whatever the tools we are using between the partnership of Europe and Egypt, the social and economic part has to be re-emphasized. It is important not to leave that part that builds the people capacity to improve themselves. The central question for the future role of the European Union should be how to meet the requirements of Egyptians and Tunisians and other North African countries in their situation. I see, being an optimistic person, that there is a window of opportunity. Yes, there is a challenge, and yes, we do have we have to analyze the previous way of implementing the support of Europeans to these countries, but there is a window of opportunity, that there is a transitional stage. This is the time of initiatives. This is the time of applying new instruments of cooperation. Can it be done? Yes, it can be done, so long as there is a will between the organizations working in that way. The economic and social dimensions, again and again, is important prerequisites to reach a minimum of stability inside these countries. Without stability, it's very difficult to go even into the values of democracy we're talking about. Democracy without stability could worsen the problems in Egypt if the economic situation is bad. And the current challenge for the European Union neighborhood policy is to support countries like Egypt and Tunisia and other stability economically and socially, together with promoting democracy. It is the time of Egypt. It is a time of the hour where friends should show the support. Because it is transition, it is a time of proactive initiatives rather than the wait and see policy.